So Jon Stine is the lead for the Open Voice Network, and this is an extremely important topic, and I'm very, very pleased to have Jon join us here talking about trust in the context of what is going on today. So Jon, I'm going to turn it over to you. You can give a little more of an introduction, and I'm looking forward to this presentation. So the stage is yours.
Teri, thank you very much. And it's very appropriate, perhaps, that this topic follows after the good presentation, the wonderful presentation of Christy, because we're talking about user trust, and especially at this time. I'm the lead of the Open Voice Network. I'm talking to you from Portland, Oregon, and the Open Voice Network is a new industry nonprofit being formed in just weeks ahead. As a directed fund of the Linux Foundation, our goal to be bringing standards, long needed standards, to the world of voice assistance. What does that mean in this context? Well, we're not bringing a specific response to COVID-19, to coronavirus, but we are addressing, and I think it's very important, we're addressing an underlying issue that's been beneath the surface and now is being brought to the forefront by the current pandemic. And Teri, if you would be so kind, change the slide, and that's the issue of trust, of user trust. We might be able to say that we're in what's appearing here on this slide. We're in a time of crisis. And we are also in a time, and it's not just voice, but we're in an era of what the Rand Corporation would call truth decay. That is, an unwillingness perhaps to believe in authoritative sources, to believe authoritative speakers, to be even data-driven and fact-driven. That is a reality of what we're living in. And yet we know that voice users and all users, but specifically voice users, as for this industry to develop, for voice to bring the value that we've been hearing on this marvelous webcast today, voice users must be able to find trustworthy sources and content. And we would argue that one of the many things that will enable that trust, that user trust, not only of consumers and patients, but of the enterprises that use it, of the marketers and media companies that create it, of developers and designers, of even the platforms. How can we create that user trust? And needed even more, and I'll speak to this in a moment, will be global standards that help govern voice and help voice mature from what may be its browser war days into days of much greater value for users and enterprises. Teri, next slide, please. We are perhaps in an era of truth decay. And I would urge you to take a look at some of the Rand Corporation research over the past couple of years. Disagreement about facts, blurring of opinion and fact, opinion and personal experience more influential than fact, just reading this. In politics, in economics, and entertainment, that may not mean that much. It just adds to the noise of life. But at times of a pandemic, it's deadly. Are they speaking to the CDC? Are they referring to Johns Hopkins? Are they finding the voices that will give guidance or voices that give a hoax? Teri, next slide. And so, again, the issue of trust below the surface of all things voice, but again, coming to the surface, especially now, and especially for those perhaps who are less digitally enabled, those in much greater areas or demographics of risk. Can I trust the source? Can I trust the content? Now, yes, voice is a social medium. Yes, we have developers and designers creating actions and skills all the time, and yet, will users be able to find the authoritative sources? Can these sources, once you connect, can they be trusted? It's an issue for voice, and not only in this time of pandemic, but across all of voice. And indeed, if the European Union would identify in their most recent white paper, it's what is keeping voice adoption from matching voice availability. Teri, next slide. And so we're looking at, again, a nonprofit. We're bringing together our technical committee. It began meeting last Friday. We're launching, we're taking off, and we invite your participation. These are some of the ideas, some of the topics that are right now on the whiteboard of the Open Voice Network. And I share with you We have the marker in one hand, we have the eraser in the other. This is a starting point. But one of the things that may be very important for this conversation, and again, the issue of user trust, could be a destination registry, a DNS for voice. Do you know who you're talking to? Can a CDC, can a Johns Hopkins, can a Cleveland, can a Mayo, can National Institutes of Health identify and claim exactly how that you get there and how you connect to them, regardless of platform? Because if we see a future of voice of being multi-platform, multimodal, multi-device, multi-use, then a destination registry we see is going to be very important to enabling that future and enabling all platforms, all users, all use to rise in value. Other things we're looking at, creating common commands for voice for common processes. How do you choose, you make a decision, transact, do a number of the things that Roger was speaking of here, several minutes ago. Every time if there's differentiation, that leads to confusion and frustration. It's not a matter potentially now during the pandemic, but it is a matter of voice, identification, authentication in a multi-platform world, and in issues of data privacy, critical to health and life sciences, and then interoperability. In the multi-platform, multi-device, multimodal, in the pandemic time, we see that trust is the critical issue. And one of the things that will help that will be standards. And within that, perhaps the first can be the development of a DNS-like destination registry. Teri? This is our charter. This is our remit. Voice assistants worthy of user trust in the multi-platform, multimodal, multi-device, multi-use future. Can we create and deliver the industry developed communally together, enterprises and developers, designers and marketers, industry developed standards and usage guidelines to help guide that future? We'll be researching, we'll be working with many like Teri, Brett Kinsella and others as we can, Bradley Metrock, to advocate the value and use of voice, and also certainly speaking to issues of policy and legislation and advocacy as people are asking about questions of data privacy and overall user trust. Teri, how do you connect? How do you join this effort? You reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's a funny spelling. Jon is the first name. Stine is the second. You'll find me on LinkedIn under the Open Voice Network, or reach out to me directly via email or phone. We need you. We need to come together as a community. The issue of user trust is critical for all of us, and especially at this time, not only in the pandemic, but God willing, the all clear sounds at some point for this industry to grow properly. Teri, back to you. I'm open to any questions or comments.
Thank you, Jon. That is important work that you are doing. We have just a minute or two here for question, if there is a question that comes in. The whole idea of trust and just the idea behind information and misinformation, as I shared with you, and we've heard today, like I had a skill that was pulled down that was I thought trustworthy, but and don't get me wrong, I completely understand the rationale behind that, but to have some type of way to deal with those sorts of situations, and if there's other ways that skill could be brought up, the work that you're doing is obviously extremely, extremely important. So I thank you for that.
Thank you for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
And yes, and we've got some comments there just saying thank you. For the voice standards will benefit the community and so on. There's a question here. What are your thoughts on inclusion and manipulation?
Critical issue of inclusion. We just saw, I think, a recent report, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, of just potential voice bias as an issue of inclusion. Dialect, there's all kinds of things that must be addressed. The fact that algorithms being trained on white guys like me leads to the exclusion of others. Broad question, broad issue, must be addressed. And the second part of that, Teri, was
manipulation.
The nudging, the use of voice in nudging in commerce, an outstanding issue to be addressed by those who are concerned with the ethics of voice. It's on our list. It's an issue. Would take hours to discuss it, and I'd love to do that with you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. We'll definitely have to have more conversations with you, Jon. I appreciate you spending some of your time, and we will be in touch and go from there.
Teri, thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.